Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a stack of sources that, well, it takes us right into the engine room of current American political thought.
It really does.
Our source material is this remarkably candid, and I mean intense, dialogue between a sitting congressman and a prominent commentator. And it touches on some of the most sensitive topics you can imagine. We're talking institutional corruption, the shifting definition of hate, and the structural integrity of American sovereignty itself.
It's definitely not an easy listen, but it is, I think, essential to understanding this moment. Our mission for you, the listener, is really to act as expert guides here.
Right.
We're going to try and synthesize the central and often conflicting arguments from this discussion. We need to unpack, I think, 3 core ideas.
Okay, what are they?
First, what happens when universal moral principles are deliberately exchanged for narrow sort of parochial group interests? Second, how foreign geopolitical conflicts are systematically, imported into our domestic life. And finally, what the true consequences of weak, compromised leadership actually look like.
Okay, let's unpack that intense philosophical start. The entire conversation really pivots on this idea of universal principles being sacrificed.
It does. And the sources open this whole discussion by focusing on remarks from a State Department official, Yehuda Kaplan, at a Jerusalem Post conference.
And what's so fascinating here, it seems, is how clearly this official articulated an identity-based approach to his job.
Exactly. Kaplan works in the office to fight anti-Semitism, and he described his role as a game changer. He focused on things like ensuring embassies have kosher food, that he could, walk off a plane with his yamulke.
But the agenda went way beyond that, right? Beyond these sort of internal identity concerns.
Oh, absolutely. The implications are substantial, especially when you get into global outreach. He laid out explicit goals,
including demanding the textbooks be changed in Indonesia.
In Indonesia, a country of 350 million Muslims. And he also spoke of holding people in Gaza accountable for what he called old textbooks, the ones that teach children to be martyrs.
So this is direct foreign policy intervention, but based on a very specific religious and ethnic mandate.
And that leads directly into the information war front. Kaplan stated they are totally revamping the State Department office to include a technology division.
For what purpose?
The explicit goal is working with major tech leaders, and the dialogue notes that many of them are Jewish on their algorithms to battle anti-Semitism on the internet.
So this is the U.S. government actively seeking to control speech on a global scale.
That's the charge. And that brings us to the core critique from the source material. One of the commentators observed that the definition of anti-Semitism as it's being applied by these institutions has, it's migrated.
Migrated from what to what?
It's no longer about somebody who didn't like Jews, but according to the source, it's become about somebody Jews don't like.
And that transition is where the moral authority just dissolves.
Precisely. The philosophical backbone of the dialogue is actually pretty simple. Hatred based on DNA or ethnicity is universally wrong, and that principle has to apply to all groups equally.
Because if a moral principle isn't universal, it's just a group interest pretending to be morality.
And therefore, it can be dismissed by others. Yeah.
And the speakers didn't just leave it at that abstract point. They used it to issue a pretty profound challenge to institutions like the ADL and the SPLC.
They did it.
They introduced the, highly challenging claim that institutionalized hate in the United States today is specifically anti-white.
That's a really powerful indictment. The source dialogue points to things like institutionalized discrimination in hiring, in access to federal grants, college admissions.
Across big companies, government agencies.
Right. Arguing these practices intentionally prevent white people from having the same access to economic and social opportunity.
So the challenge becomes, if the ADL or the SPLC truly defend a universal principle against hate, then they must oppose what the source is calling anti-white hate.
And the refusal to do so, the dialogue asserts, shows that they're operating not as moral defenders, but as defenders of a group interest.
Which effectively destroys their moral credibility in the process.
This is a complex internal contradiction the source material really zeroes in on. The failure of these powerful organizations to apply their own stated principles universally, well, according to the critique, it exposes them as just parochial power players.
And that loss of moral authority is what the dialogue ties directly back to the State Department's push for digital censorship.
Exactly, because if you're not operating on principle, you have to enforce obedience. The officials' comments about controlling what people say online were called out as inherently un-American and a form of bondage.
The question becomes, why is the U.S. government dedicating resources to censoring its own citizens and global speech?
Historically, yes, the State Department has always tried to shape global narratives. But the current push for digital censorship, according to the speakers, it's ultimately futile.
And they actually see it as counterproductive.
Totally counterproductive, especially with younger generations. The view is that attempts to silence ideas just increase curiosity. It drives the information underground and creates a kind of forbidden fruit effect.
Let's transition now from that information war to geopolitical maneuvering,
Yeah.
because the speakers drew a really crucial distinction between political criticism and ethnic hatred.
Yes. They really emphasize that criticizing a foreign government's policy choices, say the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu, is not, by definition, hatred toward an entire religious or ethnic group.
One of them likened it to criticizing Joe Biden's policy decisions without being called anti-Catholic.
That was the exact comparison. It's about policy, not identity. And the conversation then noted that even former strong supporters of the U.S.-Israel relationship are becoming, quote, untethered.
Arguing that the relationship has become too burdensome for American foreign policy goals.
They cited current Israeli expansionism and adventurism as actively harmful to Israel itself, comparing it to how U.S. military overreach has often just created more instability.
And this leads right into that explosive thesis, connecting foreign intervention with domestic consequences.
That's the one. Invade the world. Import the world.
It's a simple phrase, but the source material really details the mechanics of this intervention immigration cycle.
It does. The observation is that as soon as the U.S. intervenes militarily in a country, mass immigration from that region follows. They use the example of Somalia.
Right after the Black Hawk Down incident in '93.
Exactly. Which, according to the source, created this durable, emotional, political pretext for importing Somali populations. And the same pattern was cited for U.S. meddling in Haiti and Venezuela.
So the military action creates kind of moral obligation, and then the domestic political machine is used to import those populations.
That's the theory presented. And the geopolitical implications go even deeper, connecting back to the control of global capital markets.
Okay, this is the high-stakes financial theory about the motivations behind the conflict in the Middle East.
Right. This is where the analysis gets truly high level. So for decades, New York and London have been the undisputed global capital markets. But in the last 20 years, you've seen the rise of the Gulf monarchies, Doha, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Riyadh, and they are now challenging that dominance with massive sovereign wealth funds.
So the theory presented is that the conflict is being used as an economic weapon.
That's the claim. That Netanyahu's actions, which create blood and chaos and war migrants, are designed to destabilize the region enough so that it can't function as a safe haven for global capital.
And if the region is perpetually unstable, capital is forced to retreat back to the perceived safety of New York and London.
It's a theory suggesting the war is ultimately about financial market control.
That level of systemic failure suggests Congress has, utterly surrendered its agency to these larger forces.
And the congressman in the dialogue mentioned his own attempt in 2024 to force a vote to remove U.S. troops from Syria,
which was defeated overwhelmingly.
By a 2-to-1 margin. And one speaker highlighted the truly bizarre reality of Pentagon-funded troops fighting CIA-funded forces inside Syria, a perfect symbol of the whole fractured system.
And they presented a pretty cynical analysis as to why those troops are still there.
It's very cynical. The idea is that the small, entrenched force is there specifically so that when U.S. soldiers inevitably die, it triggers a deeper emotional connection among the public, which prevents any real effort to withdraw.
So if foreign policy is running on this kind of autopilot, it says a lot about the sovereignty of our elected leaders.
The general lack of agency was a constant theme. Power is just detached from the people's representatives and rests with special interests who control the key committees. The War Committee is for wars, the Agriculture Committee of big food.
Meaning the people who join these committees are already aligned with the interests they're supposed to be overseeing.
They've effectively surrendered their independence before they even start, and they justify it by saying they're climbing the ladder to get a seat at the table where they can finally make things better.
But the dialogue offered a really powerful counterexample of a leader who exercised what they called total agency.
Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador. He was cited as the exception. According to the dialogue, his country is now doing well. attracting investment.
And Salvadorans are actually returning home from the U.S.
Which demonstrates that when executive power is actually exercised for the nation, the results can be immediate and powerful.
But when a congressman tries to push back against this system of surrendered agency here, the source alleges that the full force of the establishment comes down on them.
And this is where we have to turn to the most serious and detailed allegations in the dialogue: the attempted operation to silence a congressman.
This part of the story gets deeply disturbing and very specific. The allegations involve an alleged extortion plot.
It started with an outreach to the congressman's father requesting a massive sum of money, $25 million.
Ostensibly to rescue a spy being held in Iran.
Right. But that offer came with an explicit coercive condition. This ransom payment, according to the allegations, was tied to making false allegations against the congressman, specifically trafficking underage girls, go away.
And here's the connection to foreign influence that the source material lays out.
The family immediately reported the extortion attempt to the FBI. The individual who delivered the message pleaded guilty to attempted fraud. But the dialogue claims an Israeli consulate official named Jake Novak was reportedly sending text messages about the expected $25 million payment,
which links a pressure campaign directly to foreign entities.
And this foreign plot, the source argues, was then weaponized domestically. The congressman believes that then Attorney General Bill Barr, who was feuding with him over election integrity laws, leaked the underlying but false trafficking story to the New York Times to compromise him politically.
Which connects the foreign influence off directly to internal U.S. political battles.
Yeah.
It connects all the dots to this broader thesis, the systemic use of intelligence operations against political figures who fall out of line.
The dialogue referenced the broader pattern: the Russia hoax, the bizarre circumstances around Jeffrey Epstein's death, the Joseph Mifsud case.
And for listeners who haven't tracked Mifsud, that case highlighted the alleged use of foreign allies, Britain, France, Italy, by U.S. political actors to engage in what the source dialogue calls treasonous acts against domestic political candidates.
It suggests that if you refuse to surrender your agency, the system deploys every tool, legal, financial, informational, to just eliminate you.
Okay, this discussion of high-level corruption and geopolitical gamesmanship is heavy. Let's zoom out from the corridors of power and look at what this means for average Americans.
Well, that's where the conversation pivoted sharply, right to the internal societal decline. The first domestic challenge they discussed was the impending automation shock.
They're forecasting a dramatic acceleration of automation in just the next 3 years.
Yeah, particularly hitting transportation, agriculture, and manufacturing. The estimate is stark. 7 million driving jobs alone could be gone in the next half-decade.
That kind of massive dislocation leads directly to a political consequence.
The predicted result is increased, almost inevitable, calls for universal basic income, because the immense wealth created by these tech platforms isn't being shared broadly.
And this economic anxiety isn't limited to the working class. The analysis suggests the middle and upper middle classes, like Florida retirees, will also be severely impacted.
Their assets, especially real estate, are vulnerable to devaluation and higher taxes as governments struggle. And yet, the super rich remain untouched, which just fuels populist calls for wealth tax policies. The dialogue even referenced that as a potential Steve Bannon agenda for 2028.
And this economic stress then leads to the final and most visceral area of societal breakdown they discussed: the decline of marriage and the problem of lonely single women.
The causes cited in the dialogue were, well, they were multi-layered and highly controversial.
They pointed to the economic structure that favors female workers over supporting families, essentially prioritizing individual careers over family formation.
And one speaker, very controversially, called the current iteration of feminism a total lie.
What the source material meant by that, though, is that the societal message that professional success, advanced degrees, a six-figure job, a fire LinkedIn profile, that this is the path to personal fulfillment and attracting a husband, is fundamentally contradicted by marriage trends.
That's the core claim. Historically, women tend to avoid marrying men who make significantly less than they do. So when the economic structure pushes women into these high-earning careers, while at the same time reducing opportunities for men,
it just collapses the potential marriage pool.
Exactly, leading to declining marriage rates and increasing female loneliness despite, high career success. The dynamic described is one where men's job is defined as protection and provision. Women's power, according to the source, is relational. It's found within the family.
And outside of that, they're reduced to what was called industrial components manipulated by capital.
And finally, the dialogue ended with a genuinely profound observation on leadership philosophy. The view that childless leaders, and they cited examples in Europe and some U.S. politicians, are inherently dangerous for the long-term stability of a state.
Why dangerous?
Because they are not vested in the future. They lack the necessary long-term perspective that comes from caring deeply about what happens after you're gone, what happens when your children inherit the world you shaped.
So lacking descendants, they're more prone to what the speakers called day trading with the world.
Yeah, more willing to engage in risky, short-sighted adventurism, geopolitical or economic, because the long-term cost is borne by generations they have no personal investment in.
So what does this all mean? We've covered these two parallel high-speed tracks. The high-level geopolitical intrigue, the corruption, foreign influence, censorship running right alongside the internal decline of core American societal structures.
The family, the economy, the moral authority of its institutions. The source material really suggests that the greatest threat to a society isn't necessarily an external attack, it's the moral collapse of its own leadership.
Specifically, the willingness of individuals to surrender agency for political prizes.
For career advancement, for a seat at the table. And in doing so, they transform a system that was supposed to be based on universal principles into one governed solely by transactional, selfish, and parochial group interests.
It leaves you with a truly heavy, but I think essential thought. What is the ultimate price a society pays when its leaders choose career advancement over the simple fundamental courage required to defend the principles they were elected to uphold?
That's the question.
And it's a question we all have to grapple with as we watch these power dynamics play out. Thank you for navigating this incredibly complex source material with us.
My pleasure.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.